Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. So, today I am talking about design as philosophy. In case you haven't clocked already, I'm a big fan of design, and I think that there are a lot of visual design principles that we can apply to life to make things easier, clearer, and better overall for us. So, I'm going to begin with first principles. So, reasoning from first principles rather than by analogy is great because it forces us to reduce whatever the thing is down to its bare components and build up from there. So, there's a really great article by Steve Parish on Farnham Street. I'd recommend going there to really delve into what first principles is. But my definition of it is just reducing things down to their bare components, to the bare essentials before building up. And you can do this with problems. And I talk a lot about oscillating between convergent and divergent thinking when it comes to design. And this, I would say, is the convergent thinking part of it, where we converge down on one essential problem. And then we use divergent thinking to think of a bunch of different ways that we can actually address that problem. And the more seamlessly, tastefully, and uniquely we can address that problem, the better the design is in general. And if we can achieve what we want to achieve, and if we can solve that problem with few components, then that's where we get really elegant design as well. So, in design, designing from first principles creates fertile ground for new, innovative ideas to grow, but in life, it helps us to cut through the noise and focus on what's particularly important. I think it was Warren Buffett who said if you list out 30 things that you want to achieve in a certain time period, order them in order of which ones you want to achieve first and last. And then the top five highlight, and the other 25 you need to intentionally avoid because these things are enticing enough to distract you from what you really want, which is the top five. And you can only focus on so many things at a time. So, this is using first principles in thinking, okay, the essential item, the essential thing is what we as individuals want to focus on. And this way of solving that problem really cuts through the noise. It cuts through all the 25 plus other options that you could go for. And you highlight very specifically what are your top five things to focus on. And this way of looking at things, this first principles idea is quite related to the idea of simplicity, the idea of minimalism, of decluttering. And in design thinking, we call this employing white space as a tool. So, white space is space intentionally put into, for example, visual design to give elements room to breathe. It can improve readability, it can enhance the hierarchy of the visual elements, and it can guide the viewer or the consumer's eye. The white space doesn't need to be white; it just needs to be blank, or it needs to be something that doesn't take away from the other elements. Something quite neutral it tends to be. So in children's book, there's a lot of white space to focus on the words. You know, there are only a few words on the page. If you're making meticulous and really good notes for studying, the more white space you have, the easier it is for those to digest those notes in general. Um, and this links to design in another way. Like, you know, in designing, it's it's not really about what we can add, it's about what we can take away. You know, you're done with a design when there's nothing left to take away. Tom Albrighton and Doug Kessler have this book called How to Write Clearly, and they say simplicity is the currency of genius. The more simple something is, the better it comes across, and the better you know the thing. I think something similar was ascribed to Einstein. And there are only so many tools that we need, and we can choose the tools that we use depending on how well they help solve the problem. This is from Cal Newport, who uses the craftsman's approach, where whether you adopt a tool or not depends on whether its positive impacts substantially outweigh the negative impacts, and it needs to positively impact the core factors that determine success and happiness in your personal and professional life, i.e., the tools that we use need to move the needle forward. Um, and if they don't, then they don't deserve a place in our toolbox, as it were. So there are so many options for us out there, but we need to make sure that we have the white space to make sure that we give the options that we choose time to grow. And those options can be with the tools that we use, it can be with what we place our attention on, it can be for the goals that we have for ourselves, it can be all sorts. And this is really difficult nowadays because we have instantaneous access to everything. There's a writer on Substack called Catherine Shannon. She's great. She writes really well. She wrote an article called "What Your Phone Is Why You Don't Feel Sexy." And in that, there is a quotation: instantaneous access to everything obviously comes at a cost. The cost being that we all behave like demented Roman emperors, at once bored and deranged, summoning whatever we want at any time. I think the reason we need to intentionally pursue white space in our lives and in design is because there are infinite options available to us, and it takes some restraint to remove ourselves from those options and to reject them, essentially. But we need to make sure that we do that. Otherwise, we spread ourselves too thin, and to use Shannon's language, we can behave like demented Roman emperors. And we don't really focus on anything. Focusing on everything means that we focus on nothing at all. We need to make sure that we dedicate time and attention to the things that we care about. And that, by definition, means rejecting the things that we don't care about. And it's about having a hierarchy for that. We also have a quotation from Eckhart Tolle, who talks about the dangers of creating this white space. We need to make sure that we do it intentionally and not for any kind of unintentional reason. We need to make sure that we're not doing it to try to become a certain kind of way. So to quote Eckhart Tolle, he says, "Renouncing all possessions has been an ancient spiritual practice in both the East and the West. Renunciation of possessions, however, will not automatically free you of the ego. It will attempt to ensure its survival by finding something else to identify with, for example, a mental image of yourself as someone who has transcended all interest in material possessions and is therefore superior, is more spiritual than others. There are people who have renounced all possessions but have a bigger ego than some millionaires. If you take away one kind of identification, the ego will quickly find another." I'll do an episode on Eckhart Tolle and the ego in future because it's fascinating. But with regards to this episode, what he's saying is that we need to make sure that we see this kind of minimalism, this pursuit of white space as a tool, and we don't adopt it as who we are. To extend the analogy, we don't become white space artists, we become artists who employ white space in the right contexts and to answer the correct questions. When it comes to designing our life and figuring out what's important to us, white space, I think, is quite a useful tool. But when it comes to other pursuits, potentially, white space isn't such a useful tool. It's difficult to find a scenario where white space isn't quite useful right now, because in most domains there is so much abundance, which requires us to intentionally remove things. But we need to, all the same, we need to make sure that we understand that it's a tool and not the be all and end all. Next up, we have color. Designers are really good when it comes to color. We know color theory. We know what colors work well together. We understand how colors work and how colors can look different in context. And that's important. But I'll get onto context later, actually. We can color coordinate our lives, and I do this all the time with our calendars. It's a very easy way to do it. And by the end of the week, if we're feeling really energized, we can look back on our week color coordinated and see which activities we did more so, and we might want to consider doing those activities more so going forward, because this week at least they've given us energy. Similarly, but also oppositely, if we finish the week feeling really drained, we can look back at the week and think about what activities we haven't done, or which activities we have done a lot and we might consider the idea that those activities drain our energy. I also think that we should do things that add color to our lives. We all know, meeting up with a certain friend or going to a certain place or going for a walk in nature or whatever it might be really can add color to our lives. But we don't need to do that every day. Part of what makes a Jackson Pollock what it is that they can sit in a white walled gallery, right? So we need to make sure that the moments full of color and vibrance are also contained within a context that also contains white walls or blank canvases. You know, Sunday is often the day for resetting, right? And I like to, using this analogy, I like to think of Sunday as the day that we clear our canvases, we clear our whiteboards, ready for the next week. If we have too much going on our whiteboards, then it can get quite overwhelming. But also, there are some activities which, rather than adding color to our lives or wiping the color clear and starting with a blank canvas, there are some activities that make the color more prominent. Again, to use the analogy, it outlines the color in a thick black Sharpie. For me, those things are waking up early, going to the gym. Everything just feels a lot better, a lot more heightened, a lot more accentuated when I've done those things, when those things have happened initially, when I feel a sense of health and vitality in my life, and when I've eaten well and all of these sorts of things. So I think maybe I'm being too abstract here, but I think considering color as a metaphor in various aspects of our life can be quite a helpful exercise, quite useful. So perhaps think about what activities add color to your life, which activities make the color more prominent, and which activities wipe the slate clean, allow you to take a deep breath and move on to the next act of coloring. What I said about Jackson Pollock sitting in a whiteboard gallery, this relates to context, which is also really important in design thinking. What is it that's surrounding our lives? Designers, we do this all the time when presenting to clients. A finished logo isn't enough. Eventually, clients will want to see the logo flourish in situ. This means mocking it up. And this is because everything's more effective when we can see it in context. But the question is, does our context that we put ourselves in make us more effective, or does it distract us from what we really want? Fortunately or unfortunately, I don't think we rise to the level of our goals. This is James Clear, we fall to the level of our systems. And I think our context is included in our system. James Clear actually talks about this in Atomic Habits, how you can design your environment for success. But that also includes the digital diet that we have, the people we surround ourselves with, where we live, etc., etc. So I think we want to make sure that we're looking at the context that we sit in very specifically. Virgil Abloh actually said this: if you look at a candle and a candle is in the bin, it's a piece of rubbish. Whereas if a candle sits in a gallery, it becomes a piece of art. Let's put ourselves in the gallery. And finally, there's symmetry and balance. I think these are really important things in design thinking and in life, but I think we can tend to have it wrong. There are a lot of successful people who cast balance away and dismiss it and say it's nonsense to want to be successful whilst having balance. George Heaton, for example, he said, I think balance is nonsense. I'm paraphrasing here. He said balance is nonsense because, you need to work really, really hard, and I'm not trying to play hard as well. You need to work really hard. But I think everything is balanced. Let me explain. So George Heaton's approach of working harder now, it's not a rejection of balance, but it's a form of designed imbalance that seeks a higher order kind of equilibrium over a longer time horizon rather than immediately. So he, in this example, is intentionally creating a temporary high energy state in the present to fuel a more relaxed, resource-rich and stable state in the future. So we need to think about the balance over the course of our lives and, even beyond our own domain, right? If we work hard, play hard right now, then everything is balanced and the universe doesn't need to conspire for or against us. Whereas if we are really imbalanced now, if we work really hard now, the universe has to conspire to give us the things in the future to be more relaxed and resource rich and stable, and all of these things intermingle together. But it just happens over a longer time horizon. And then that's where patience comes in. But similarly, if we take more than we give right now, then we're going to need to clear that debt. Apologies. We're going to need to clear that debt at some point in the future. And we look at, symmetry and balance happens all the time in art and design. You think about the Parthenon on the Acropolis in Athens. That's very symmetrical. However, it's not in the way that you might think. The columns, for example, are actually thicker in the middle than they are at the top or the bottom. So even though that's symmetry, it's not completely straight in the way that we might think. And I think the analogy there, or the metaphor there, is that symmetry and balance, as I've described, isn't always what it might seem at first sight. So just think it through a little bit more. And I think that kind of thickness in the middle and thinner at the top and the bottom, that kind of trick of the eye, comes when we look at our life philosophy, when we look at the time horizons. Everything becomes balanced over a longer time horizon, but in the immediate, in the present, it doesn't. And we can work hard, play hard now if we want to. That's fine, but that means that there is no that's a situation where we're static, right? There's nothing that the universe needs to do to create order, to create balance. Whereas if we work really, really hard now, the universe will conspire to mean that we're more relaxed in the future. This is a bit of a woolly belief that I've got, but it's the one that I've got and it's the one that I've observed. So it's the one that I'm sticking with, and it seems to make sense in my head. Okay, that's it for this episode. I hope you liked it. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for all the support so far. Please make sure that you leave a review. So far, I've got straight 5-star reviews on Spotify, which is lovely. So please leave a 5-star review if you enjoyed this. And please also make sure that you share this with a friend who you think would like it or you think would benefit from listening to this. Sharing it around really makes all the difference. But until the next one, I appreciate you for listening, and I will see you soon.